I don't know if the intro video came on, everyone, but Grand Rising, everyone. Uh, my name is Dr. Deonté Carter. I am with the illustrious host, the, Lisa Carrington, and we'll be talking about anxiety in high performers. So, um, how we usually start things off is introductions. So, um, for me, my name's Dr. Deonté Carter. Am a I was a former victim advocate for survivors of sexual violence. I am also a I also do I also do I'm also your host for Black Mental Health Matters, and I'll just keep it brief. So Lisa, I'll go ahead and let you have the floor and do your introductions.
Well, hello everybody. Good morning. So my name is Lisa Carrington, all the way here from Toronto. So this is the first weekend of FIFA. So I'm sure there's a lot of excitement and traffic and all kinds of things I'm going to be walking myself into today. But other than that, I am a health and safety coordinator. So I am in construction and been doing this. For more than 20 years now. So I've had the opportunity to be in the private sector, working on some big major infrastructure projects here in Toronto. And then I've had the opportunity as being a civil servant for close to 20 years. And that's how I kind of got my way into construction. So this topic today, anxiety in high performers, is kind of right up my alley. I consider myself a bit of a high performer, and I know I've been in situations when anxiety has taken over. So, that being said, Deontay, if we want to go around the room and introduce everybody.
Yes. So, ladies first. Um, so whoever would like to introduce themselves, you have the floor.
I can go first. So I am Anastacia Sands. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and the founder of Healing Works. And so basically, I help high achieving Black professionals unlearn survival mode so that they can thrive in life and in love.
Nice. Okay.
Wow. So needed. So needed. And it's tapping into that potential, tapping into that motivation, that potential to break down the barriers. Just absolutely phenomenal. And then my screen is so small. And then um, would you like to take the floor to introduce yourself as well?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Drue Edwards. I am an associate clinical social worker. I have my MSW. I am doing community based mental health. I work with children in the foster care system. And I'm also a life coach, and I support folks with improving their relationship with themselves and others. And I also consider myself a high functioning professional. So I'm super excited to get into this topic today.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of high functioning. Lisa opined in the industry that she's in for health and safety within the construction. I was in the military and now getting ready to become a professor and health, well, basically home inspector as well. A lot of essential working components are attached to who I am as well. But last but not least, Curtis, tell us
Hey,
about who you are.
I'm Curtis Lamarr Jones, and I am a educator. I taught at several universities. I'm a mentor. My background is student affairs, higher education. I served as a student leader, student organization advisor, and I'm also a professional voice actor and actor, right? And
Okay. Okay, Curtis. All right.
I've been in about 7 television shows and done a whole lot of voiceover commercials and what have you. And so right now, I'm working as a PRN for Morehouse School of Medicine and various medical schools as a simulated patient actor, right? It's kind of helped develop the communication skills of these upcoming health professionals.
Wow. I mean, Jill and Jacks of different trades, masters of none. This is
That's me. Hey,
right.
I'm eclectic. I'm eclectic as it comes.
I'm speaking for all of you. I mean, my goodness, you all are in so needed spaces. And this begins me to get me started on my first question. Why do high performing individuals often experience anxiety despite their achievement and external success? Oof, deep.
Let me start this off. I grew up in a single female-headed household in Cleveland, Ohio. Father wasn't around. Brother who was a drug dealer, sister who was in the street life. Everybody was in the street world except for me. So I was bullied quite a bit because I was the oddball, right? And so I went on to get several degrees, became an actor, television, and so it's been a very arduous journey because I didn't have a lot of support. I had parents who grew up in the South. Mom's was from Memphis, dad's from Alabama. They grew up in the Jim Crow era. And so they didn't really know how to support me. My mother had a 5th grade education, dad 4th grade. And so it was a struggle, and so it was really difficult for me to relate to my family members. And then when I would come home, and I would share, what I would learn from school, I was oftentimes met with, well, you think you're better than us now. Or you think you're good now. So I went through that, and so I had to learn to just accept myself and say, hey, you know what, that's your trip, not my journey, and I'm going to do what God has called me to do with or without you.
Wow. Wow. And we share a lot of parallels. I'm from Akron, Ohio, but I stay in Canton. And it's just interesting. My father's from Greenville, Alabama. So me and you, Curtis, we, as I say to Lisa, we're kindred spirits. I feel the same thing going on. So, Anastacia, how does this question apply to you regarding high performing individuals and anxiety and the achievement aspects and the external successes?
Yeah, I think honestly, hearing Curtis speak just made me think about that history of, especially for ancestors who are enslaved in the history of colonization in the US. And so being seen, especially being seen achieving, has always been unsafe because that meant that either your family would then be separated, it meant that you might suffer a public death. Like the consequences of being seen achieving have always been significant and dire at times. And so I think now it's just sort of shifted. And so I think it did shift into sort of that, like, condemning people who are achieving, like with what you said, Curtis, of, oh, you think you're better than us, like sort of internalizing that idea of being lesser than. And so I think those two things are kind of working a lot of times within us, until we're able to like break that cycle, basically.
And last but not least,
Can you remind me of the question, please?
oh, not a problem. Why do high performing individuals often experience anxiety despite their achievements and external success? It's deep.
Yeah, I think you all did a really great job of touching on like the history and the pressure of doing something different in your family and in your community and feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I think there's also something to speak to a strength in this, that high performers oftentimes they refuse to fail, or they refuse to failing, meaning that they refuse to not pursue their dream or what they set out for themselves. Not failure in a sense, I'm going to try this and I couldn't do it, so therefore I failed. No, failure to them instead is, I didn't try this thing and I refuse to not take that chance and to do it. So a lot of times it can feel, this concept of like imposter syndrome, because
Yes.
you have high performers who are like, you know what, I'm going to do it because, my faith is strong. I believe, I have the credentials, I have the experience, so I'm going to take a whack at it. And then we get into this space and there's this doubt of like, oh, am I really supposed to be here? And I worked hard for this, and they still continue to keep going. So I think there's this level of ambition that really also drives people who are high performers.
Okay. So
Yeah.
in reference to that, so what I mean, there are high performers and things that I had to do to kind of recognize some like warning signs when I get to that state, right? Because I am that person that like I have the credentials, I have this, I'm just going to do it, I can do it, and psych myself up, and but then I needed to take a moment to recognize, okay, when I'm getting into that space, like some signs to kind of like, okay, you need to like woosah it out or calm down a little bit, right? Because you can't do everything. So like Curtis, for example, you dealt with a lot of students and stuff like that, and I'm sure you saw a lot of high performers in your classes. So in that type of situation where you see that high performer, but you see like, do you see something where they're just doing too much? Like, what are some of the warning signs that you can see that person that is going over and above what they have to?
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up, because I know we live in a society where oftentimes, and I had this in my family, it's like my family paid more attention to my brother who was in and out of prison, right? But when I was in school and college, it's like it seemed like people were not interested in what I was going through. And I remember talking with a friend of mine in graduate school. She and I were in the same classes, and she said, Curtis, she said, you know, your parents or your mom, she doesn't really focus on you because you're doing well. Whereas, your sister who's on drugs, your brother who's in prison, she feels that there's a need to really to show them more support, right? And it says, but even those of us who are doing well, we still need that encouragement. So are we leaving out the children or the young people or people who are doing well because we're focusing so much on the people who aren't doing as well? Because everybody needs support, whether you are on crack or whether you're at Harvard working on your graduate degree. We all need support. So in reference to what you're asking me, Lisa, when I would see my high performing students, I would give them just as much love and attention as those students who were falling by the wayside. And Drew, I want to say this to you. When you were talking about the imposter syndrome, I remember last year I was on a TV show. I played a pastor on a show called Sweet Magnolias, season 3. Yeah, I was. Yeah, and so I remember on set, down when it came time for me to do my lines, I was so overwhelmed because I'm sitting here with all of these major actors, and I used to watch the show and never imagined being on the show. And I played this pastor, right? So I'm getting ready to say my lines, and I knew my lines, but my mind just totally went blank. And I was stressed out because the year prior, my mother passed, and then 5 months later, my sister passed, and the next year, my brother died, and then the next month, my father died. And so I had all this stress, right? And so I remember the director came up to me, and she was like, Curtis, and she started talking to me, and she said, she got me out of my head. She said, this is what you need to do. Focus on the role, and then when she started talking to me and coaching me, I just came out with it. And if you see this episode, you would never suspect that I was struggling during that moment, right? So going back to the high performers, it's like all of this stress, eventually led me to several positions that were so stressed out. I ended up coming to work one day and felt stroke signs and had all this, you felt the, my face, just, and I went to the hospital and I ended up with a blood pressure 201/101, stayed in the hospital for
Wow.
6 days, right? Ended up having a mini stroke, right? From all of the stress, right? And so this particular topic is really passionate to me because I want everyone to know that our health, is so important, and no job, no individuals, anybody, nothing is worthwhile trading in our health.
You know what? I'm going to touch on what you said about, when people decide to help people. So when you're broken, people are quick to help you. But when you are like a strong pillar, people forget because they're like, oh, she's got it, he's got it, or they're not showing anything. So like they must be okay. And I know for myself, I know a lot of people can see me and say, oh, she's got it, or and that's something to me as well, because sometimes I'm always putting that smiley face, you know what I mean? And I tend to just keep a lot of things to myself or wait till I get home or whatever, right? And deal with it then. But sometimes, like I said, like there are a lot of strong people that are holding it together, but they're broken. And we need to take that time to like talk to everybody,
Yeah.
you know? So I like that you brought that point out. So I guess, you know, I'm a perfectionist.
I was literally thinking of that term in my head. Lisa,
So,
I'm
Yes.
glad.
so
Yes.
yeah, so I'm hands up, I'm a perfectionist. So how can, that type of trait contribute to anxiety in high
Yeah.
performers, and what are the potential consequences, right? I know for myself, I think I always have to be perfect. I don't know where I get this from. I don't know if it's probably from my childhood when, your parents have, certain expectations of you. I know for myself, being the elder of my, siblings and stuff like that, there was always this expectation to kind of almost be like the parent when the parent wasn't there. And then they had to follow my lead and I had to make sure they were in line. And so
Yes.
you're always trying to be perfect at all times because you don't want to get yelled at. You don't want, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. You don't want like corporal punishment because our parents used to lay hands. So you didn't want that smoke. So at the end of the day,
Exactly.
you're trying to be as perfect as possible so you don't get it. But it weighs something on you. And now it's something that now in my adulthood, I do carry with me. Right. So for the rest of you, like, what does that mean for you being a perfectionist?
But let me say something. You really hit a nerve here, because I'm a very analytical person, and so I always try to understand why I am the way I am. And so I've thought about this. I had a father who was very critical. I mean, and my parents were in an adulterous relationship. So my father had two households, right? And Papa was a Rolling Stone, if you will. And so my father was very critical. I don't know why, but little boys, they want affirmation from their fathers, and
Yes.
they look for their dads, as that blueprint. So
Yes.
my dad used to criticize me. He would sit back and say, "Look at you with your fat ass, boy. All you do is eat." I mean, and it was always negative. And my mother would try to encourage him to say good things about me. So long story short, growing up with all this criticism, it made me feel like I have to be perfect because I'm afraid that if I'm not, I'm going to get criticized and condemned. And so that spirit has transferred into my adult. I still struggle with that, right? I feel like I have to
Yes.
be perfect. And if I'm not, it's like, I'm going to get it. Right. And so I'm learning that I'm human and that sometimes, you're going to fail in order to become better. So I'm working through that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to speak to that too, because I think that's something when I think about, especially when I think about anxiety and high performers and what some of those signs are, that is one, like having an inner critic and almost being your own worst enemy 24/7. And that voice is usually a bunch of people's voices that have been internalized. And then on top of that, I would say just a mind that never shuts off. Like you're thinking about all the things that you need to do, that you need to get done. And then when you try to rest, it's not actually restful. And you may even feel guilty for resting because you're thinking about the things that you're not doing. And so then that feeds the anxiety. And then on top of that, I would say like the sort of undealt with vulnerable emotions or grief, things that are just being carried that have never been released or processed, that just kind of build up, especially too if you grow up in a household where expressing emotions that aren't, or expressing any type of emotions might be seen as like weak, expressing any type of vulnerability, then all of those things just create this pressure that's intense, and then leads to a lot of like health issues or just that constant ball of anxiety that feels impossible to get rid of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's some valid points, and I think that a lot of it is just trauma. I think within our community, whoever I can speak for myself, that like sometimes I feel like I'm a walking time bomb, because there's things that I'm still trying to deal with at this age that it's still carried off from my childhood. Right. And there's also a part too that those traumas I have allowed that to where I identify with.
Yes.
Do you know
What are
I
your
mean?
thoughts on that, Drue?
I'm having a lot of thoughts. A lot of directions this can go in. I'm just loving this conversation. Thinking about the history of, as Black people, not really a lot of Black people really may not have had a safe space to express their emotions, and their parents may not have had a safe space because their parents may not have had a safe space to express their emotions. I mean, segregation wasn't that long ago.
It was not.
Right?
Not that long ago.
It was not that long ago. And you have to think about all of the harm that has been done to the Black community in terms of whether it's trying to, like, the system trying to break apart Black families. And you can't receive this benefit if there's a man in the home. And if you're a Black child, if you're a Black boy, a Black man, you don't really have the opportunity to make a mistake if you're pulled over by a police officer. So you can't show if you show you're anxious can come out and being fidgety. And if you're too fidgety, that's dangerous. So you have to be able to compose yourself, you hold it in, and you present yourself as very put together. So that way you are not putting yourself at risk of danger happening to you. And I think this just stems back to just very, even deeper to that of survival of the fittest. Like, you have to be strong. And what that looks like is being composed. You don't want to be labeled as an angry Black woman either in the workplace, because you worked your way up to this level and you look around and there's not that many people who look like you. So then you have all this pressure of, I'm the representative also. And this composure. And so I think there's a lot of feelings that get suppressed in us, and it just kind of runs in the background, as you were saying. Anastacia, am I saying your name right? Anastacia?
Anastacia.
Okay. And it's really important to check in with yourself.
Yes.
And I think when you're just feeling like, you can feel, Curtis, like what you were saying, if we take a minute to stop, you feel like your body is off, because it will start presenting itself in physical symptoms. Yeah. So yeah, that's my answer.
But don't you think
Yes.
sometimes that although there's the pressures and anxieties out
Mhm.
there, but there's also how do I say this? I'm in a space where sometimes I'm the only one, or there's this space where that individual is the only one. And then they've worked so hard to cultivate this kind of like, get people to accept them and look past their skin color and like all these things. Then another one comes out of nowhere, and now there's two of you. And so that person who's been there, say, prior to you, and has created this space for themselves, and then now all of a sudden you come in, that creates anxiety. That creates
Yes.
a level of perfectionism because you're trying to not allow this person all the work that you did to create this space, and now all of a sudden this person is just plopping in and everything's good, right? That
Yes.
creates anxiety, and then you become like a high performer because it's like you feel like you're in some level of competition with this person now,
Yeah.
and you put this unnecessary pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
Do you
And
know what I mean?
and it just it just it bolsters us into this next question. And I mean, before I even opine into that next question, I mean, I got pulled over for having a luxury car being black in an Audi in 2017 with a gun to my face. So it's very my argument around that would be as black as a black, basically, if you're a part of that village of being black, that's high performing because you're always operating at a high performance, hypervigilance,
Mhm.
and executive functioning. But then when you get to a C-suite level, it's what did you do to get to this point? And a
Yeah.
lot of disparaging language, a
Mhm.
lot of disparaging language, and that is just so ugly. um and I just wanted to mention that I'm gonna do something a little bit different. We had a question, a LinkedIn member, and shout out to Lilac, one of our hosts with Black Mental Health Matters. I see you in the comments, Lilac. I see you, Empress. I do. And she's just commenting away and just really just putting a lot of context for the show. But there was a LinkedIn user that mentioned a really vital question. And as someone that is a part of this community, I definitely want to mention this as a question. So, how common does neurodivergence how common is neurodivergence in the Black community based off of what you all have seen? And I'm neurodivergent because I had a traumatic brain injury while serving in both the United States Marines and the United States Army, as well as a survivor of sexual violence. So a lot of that trauma has affected cognitive functioning, memory. So I'm a part of that community. So this is kind of like a background question that kind of popped up, and we're utilizing this space because this LinkedIn user chose to be anonymous. But how common is neurodivergence within the Black community? How do
Can
you
you can you define that? Because this is the first time I've actually heard of neurodivergent. So can you clarify exactly what that means?
So neurodivergence, all that means is someone that may be on the autism spectrum, that someone that might be that has a hidden disability, a cognitive disability, a unique disability, whether it be Down syndrome, autism, but it could be a disability that's developmental, but then also there's a disability that was acquired, like a traumatic brain injury or something natural disaster that has happened that has compromised basically executive functioning, how you think, how you operate, how you make decisions in life. So that's the definition of like how neurodivergence plays a role in life.
Well,
So
I'm going to jump in on that one, specifically in our community. In reference to that, sometimes in situations, I know growing up as a kid, because they didn't know how to handle some of these ADHD, anxiety, and stuff like that. They kind of labeled you a certain type of child, right? So they didn't know how to manage that. And so they created just this anxiety with a lot of these kids, and misdiagnosing these kids because they actually didn't know how to, teachers didn't know how to handle it back in the 80s and 90s or whatever. They kind of just put you in a corner in a special class. And I'm saying that because I'm one of those kids, and put you in a corner in a special class because you weren't like everybody else. But it's just that they just didn't know how to handle those kind of things. Now we have programs and things that it can identify with some of the things that Dr. Deonté had mentioned. But in our community, sometimes it's like a stigma,
Yo,
right?
ooh,
And
it
then
happened in the U.S. too. Woo.
and sometimes these kids are like I said, the misdiagnosis, or the teacher doesn't, or the teacher doesn't want to deal with them, and then they kind of just put them in this corner, and then they label or create this label around this kid, like they're bad, or they're not worthy, or they're just not like with everybody else. And then that kid gets kind of segregated, and that creates anxiety with these
Yes.
children, right? And I'm
Yes.
sure, Curtis, you can maybe relate to that as well as being a professor, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, we live in a society, where everything is like neatly contrived into labels to categorize people, right? And I always wonder, what's the purpose behind categorizing people? I remember teaching
Wow.
a psychology class where um, we talked about how they have certain programs for gifted children, but then the children who are labeled, who are like at risk, or okay, autistic, what have you. What do we do to make them feel encouraged? If they're constantly being, you know, um, compared to gifted children, where you have programs where they're giving money to these kids to provide them with great exposure to different opportunities, but the kids who are labeled, what are they getting? And then I've read information about how these kids who are labeled, how they're often placed on the track to go to jail, to go to, it's like a prison pipeline. And so, I was thinking about these books I used to read. Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu, author of Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, he talks about
Ooh,
that. You know what
deep.
I'm saying? And it's just like there's just a lot of evil that's going on as it pertains to, you know, um, helping individuals of African American descent in particular, to arise above the negative standards and the things that are put in place to hinder us from equally moving into successful avenues within this society and across the African diaspora.
Yes. What are your thoughts, Drue? I know your highway, your mind of a highway is like the concepts of intersectionality. Shout out to Dr. Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. Just everything is just going every which way. What are your thoughts around all of this, Drue?
Yeah. Hmm. There's been some research that shows that there's a possibility that Black males could be overdiagnosed and that females can be underdiagnosed. So
Wow.
I would just encourage um, any adult that feels like, they feel like something is maybe different or off about them. They feel like they're struggling to definitely get evaluation and see like it's never too late to get an evaluation and see if you may have ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, um, because these disorders are really like lifespan developmental types of disorders. So typically, like
Yes.
if you have it today, you typically should have showed signs when you were a child. So you can get diagnosed at 42, at 29, at 70 years old. It's not too late. So I definitely just want to encourage that. I think, as we've spoke on, stigma is definitely a challenge in the Black community. And that has prevented people from pursuing, getting this diagnosis because of fear and shame of what it might mean. But it can actually be very freeing and helpful to have an understanding into how your brain works, because being neurodivergent isn't bad. It's just different.
Yes. Yes. I I agree. I have a son that's on the autism spectrum disorder, and I call him, he's my superhero. My Nate the Great. I don't he just he has the blinders to the politics of things and just focuses on the task at hand. Drawing Super Mario, drawing Sonic. Like it's beautiful. It's a beautiful way of thinking. It's a beautiful philosophy of thinking. And that's such a superpower. And my oldest son, he's 17, he's on the DMDD spectrum. And a lot of the times it's a lot of, hey Jay, we do love you, we do care about you. It's a lot of dismal thinking when referring to DMDD. And Drue, you bring up a really like fascinating point on how it is affects the lifespan. And there's different variances that come out as you grow, as you get older, as far as it goes. So, Anastacia, what are your thoughts around? How do you feel about the commonness within our community, the Black community, of neurodivergence?
So I'll say this as a caveat, in that I have a complicated answer, maybe a relationship to it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Mainly because when I think about like even the word neurodivergent, what is it that we're divergent from? And typically that means that there has to be a norm that we're being paired against. And that norm is typically white males. And so I think that for me, sometimes I almost wonder what it would be like because I guess backing up, I feel like a lot of times things that maybe in a non-colonial world would just be normal are pathologized. And so I think that, so to answer the question, I think there's a lot of PTSD for sure. I think like Dr. Joy DeGruy's book, there's a lot of post-traumatic slave syndrome as well that manifests in different ways. And I think too that most people are neurodivergent living in this type of society that is not normal. It's not normal to have to constantly be hypervigilant, and unsure of how you're going to be perceived. And so I say that to say I have a complicated answer to that. And I think oftentimes, to Drue's point, with a lot of young Black boys being overdiagnosed and a lot of Black women being underdiagnosed, I also think that Curtis mentioned earlier the gifted students. And very rarely were the gifted students Black students, although a lot of times the symptoms, if you will, are very similar. And so I think and so all that to say, I don't think of these things even as disabilities, but more so super abilities, if you will, because it's a beautiful, well-rounded way of viewing life that we need. We need each person's unique gifts. But I think that in this sort of neo-colonial society, all of that is pathologized if you don't think like a white man or a white woman.
I'll add a layer to that. I'm going to add a layer to your point. People fail to realize that there were British Moors that helped create the aqueduct system. A lot of the greatness from our culture has been so whitewashed. A Black woman created a sanitary napkin. A Black woman created a security system. Black woman, like Dr. Dre, came up with the Ring camera, but then that idea got stolen. a Black woman created the Terminator and the Matrix, and that idea got usurped. So again, these are things that are constructs, that are barriers and covered, like history of the Moors, aqueducts, and the sewer system. Like these are, there are a lot of Black greats, and I'm gonna give Lisa her flowers because she did a phenomenal job with speaking on how these constructive innovators for Black history. I mean, she gave off a list of phenomenal Black inventors, and just the list goes on of like engineers and all of this for this presentation. And when I watched that video, it just really reminded me of like, we come from greatness, but it was stripped, it was usurped from that, and basically it was just covered up with no, no, no. Thomas Edison really came up with the filament of the light bulb. No, no, not a Black person. No, no, the cell phone was not created by two Black men that had came up with the patent and the idea of a cellular device. So these are all ideas, and these are all inventions and creation to how we are in society today. And it's stripped. It constantly gets stripped, and it's constantly pushed to the side, ostracized, basically devalued, irrelevant. And we're uncovering all of this, and we're seeing all of this, and it's coming to fruition once again. And it leads me to my next question. How can perfectionism contribute to anxiety in high performers, and what are potential consequences?
Well, let me speak to that. A mini stroke and high blood pressure and insomnia and AFib, right? And as I think it was Drue, you mentioned, that how stress can manifest itself physically, and
Absolutely.
That's been my testimony, right? And so even today, I struggle with sleeping, right? But I have a faith in God that has brought me thus far, because the things that I've gone through as a child, I was bullied quite a bit, right? And so I've been dealing with anxiety since I was 5, 6. You know what I'm saying? But the fact that I'm still here, that I haven't been on drugs, that I've not been institutionalized, is a miracle in and of itself. That I'm able to speak to you all here in a sound mind, right? So I have to give credit to God for that, because He has allowed me to be brought out of the ashes into a purposeful existence. So giving honor to God for that right there. So in answering your question, just the performance anxiety is set aside from just the just living in a society where the rules are different. It's just like I was thinking about the Carmelo Anthony incident, where the guy was sentenced to 35 years in prison for defending himself, and ended up killing, the white guy who was trying to get out of the tent, right? And so I'm thinking to myself, if that had been, a Black person who was killed by a white boy, with the outcome of that sentencing been different. But we live in a world with double standards. I was thinking about what you were saying, Carter, about how we have to be hyper vigilant, and the expectations are different for us than they are from white Americans. I remember a couple years back, I was walking down the street in my neighborhood, and I got stopped by these white police officers, and the guy was just like, "Okay, you look like somebody that was suspected of being in a fight." And I'm an older cat. I'm like, I'm not trying to fight nobody. And I had somebody on the phone, and I said, "Hold on, the police are stopping me." And he said, "Well, we need to see your hands." And I said, "See my hands?" He was like, "Yeah, we need to see your hands." Because I guess somebody got stabbed or whatever. And so I'm thinking, well, do I put my hands up and show him my hands? And if not, then what would that lead me to? What would that lead to in terms of me not, giving him what he wanted? So I put my hands up, and I'm feeling violated. I'm like, I'm just out here going for a walk. Why is he telling me to put my hands up to prove to him that I wasn't in this fight? right? And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. So that has kept me from wanting to walk around the neighborhood now because of that. So after he did that, and I told my friend, I said, I said, hold on, I don't want you to, because I don't know how this is going to turn out. I, I'm gonna keep you on hold so you can hear what's going on. So then when
Yes.
I told the officer, I said, are you satisfied with what you're looking? He was like, yeah, are you? And got nasty with me. And I'm like, wow. So I contacted one of my friends who is a retired police officer, and I explained to him what had happened. He says some of these white police officers, they actually go around to look for black men in particular to do these things to for whatever reason, right? And so he said, I don't, he said, if you were someone who was being suspected of whatever, he said, the way that they handle it leads me to believe that they were just basically out fishing, to do this, to create a situation where they could make you feel less than. I don't know why that is. If that is the case, I don't know why people do that. But we live in a world that I think is just evil. So sometimes you can't even understand, the premise behind the evil doings of what people do.
Hmm. So what
What are you?
advice would right now for, so that's you as an adult experiencing that, and the way the world is today, right? It's pretty scary, in my opinion. It's pretty scary now. Like you can't just walk out freely without, you have to know what you're walking yourself into in these days, right? So what about young people today? They're dealing with a lot right now, right?
Yes.
So in this type of in this conversation right now, what advice should we be giving to the young people today? Because I feel like they're just not getting any level of direction. I don't think people are taking I don't think people are taking accountability for them, to be honest with them. They're kind of just out there, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I don't live in the US, but what I see is there's a lot of kids. I think there's like places like Chicago and other places where these kids are swarming all over the place and doing all kinds of stuff. And I feel like these kids are kind of just left on their own accord. You know what I mean? And there are kids that are the high performers and they have these anxieties. And I don't feel that they have like proper spaces to really go and talk to people, to be honest with you. So what advice could we give to young people today that are that are high performers, but are experiencing this right now?
So are you specifically talking about the high performance, or are you also including the at-risk children?
I think I'm including the high performers first, right? Because there are a lot of high performers out there, which we don't really talk about the positive these days. We seem to always talk about the negative.
Right.
So there are young kids out there that are doing the do, and I feel like they're on their own, doing their thing. So where are they going to turn, right? And find a safe space to speak. Are teachers nowadays really taking the time, like back when we were in school, really taking the time to teach these kids, or are they just there to do their 9 to 5 because they feel pressure on their own and they tap out?
Yes.
Do you know what I
Yes.
mean? There's a lot of educators out there. I know my sister is like, there's a lot of pressure that she has to deal with. It's not like teachers back in the day where they can speak up and say and command their classroom, and they just tap out. So yes, the high performers, I don't know if they're getting the support. And then if you want to talk about the other, the kids that are not high performers, like where do these young people go today?
Like how do you see that, Anastasia, in that regard, of the premise that Lisa is speaking on, the high performance, but then also within the youth? What have you noticed? What have you what are trends that you noticed that you've seen?
I think, and I'll be honest, because most of my work is more so with adults, but I am in Chicago, and so I occasionally will a workshop for some teens in the area, and I think what I would say is first and foremost, find ways to, and I know we talked about the hypervigilance of being outside, but I think finding safe ways to be out in nature, like here in Chicago, we have a lot of urban gardens and things like that. So and a lot of the places here that we have internships for teens specifically. And so it's a way to, because when I think about high performers, the anxiety, and even just for adolescents in general, finding ways to, one, get away from technology because it's sort of everywhere, being able to get away from the phone and being able to actually do things that physically and mentally slow you down. So that would be my first thing. And then in terms of, I also do think finding a mentor, whether it is at school, whether it is finding a summer job or a summer internship, with adults that you likely would be able to get mentorship from, for any teens who are like of a certain religion, then finding it at church or at a mosque, but finding spaces where that mentorship is possible. And I really do believe those spaces are out there and available.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I like that you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go
Dr.
ahead.
Brennan. No, I was
No.
just because I'm a big advocate of mentorship. Right. I love mentorship or whatever, and I think mentorship really can help people. It's a person you can rely on, somebody you can have conversation with, someone you can bounce ideas with, somebody that just is outside of that can give you a different perspective than your normal day to day. Right.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of these kids, and I like that you touched on the whole technology, like these kids need to disconnect, right? They're constantly on these devices, constantly looking at the phone. I'm guilty of that as well. And there's a lot of there's a lot of anxiety on that too, because what you're seeing is not always real.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Yes.
fake, and
Yeah.
until you
Yes.
really, and people are not taking critical thinking to say, like, let me dive in a little deeper to find out a little bit more. People don't critically think. And so people get looped into certain things or whatever, especially like social media and stuff, and they get duped because it's not
Yes.
real. And I feel like a lot of these
Like
kids are
that.
getting sucked into these it's like the vortex, right? And they get
The
sucked in
hoodwinking.
Yeah.
until it gets to a point where it's how do I say this? Is like they get sucked into this vortex and they get so deep into it, and then something happens, right? And it's
Absolutely.
too late because they're so deep into it
Yes.
and stuff like that. So we do need to do a better job. I mean, I understand in circuit like with COVID and stuff like that, a lot of parents didn't know what to do and said, here's your device. Let that entertain you, because they were dealing with their own stress too, because you're locked in your house, right? And so
Yes.
that then became the norm, right? And
Yes.
then now, and I think it just heightened now, because now we went through the whole COVID thing, and then these kids were locked into these devices and these things or whatever, and parents didn't know how to disconnect them from it.
Yeah.
And so they just said, you know what? Okay, as long as they're not causing any trouble and they're kind of out of my hair or whatever, like, okay, Billy, go sit in the corner and go deal with that tablet.
Yeah.
It's true, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And to that point too, I think it's so true. And something that I've been seeing is how incredibly dysregulating it is, both for adults. And if it's dysregulating for adults, then it's that much more dysregulating for children, who, like, whenever they're feeling any kind of vulnerable emotions, feeling bored, and going to that, it actually blocks your body and your brain from being able to regulate internally. it keeps you from being able to process emotions. And so now your brain is just continuing to go without any space to actually like slow down, regulate. And so then the next thing that comes is reactive behaviors as a result. So yes,
But
that
Absolutely.
But you know what the
is
other thing
necessary.
too is say like a high performer, because everything is online right now, you could see everything. Like let's take for example LinkedIn, okay? So you see people that are in your space. And so there are people out there that are looking at that and then they're a high performer and they're looking at say somebody in their space like, "Oh, well how did they get this award?" And then they start putting these pressures on them to compete.
Wow.
People are in secret
Yes.
competitions with each other and they don't even know, right? Because
Yes.
right, and the same thing with like social media and stuff like that. Can you imagine these like if you're a high performer and you think you reached the top, but then you see Billy, I always use Billy, don't ask me why, but Billy over there is doing ABCD, then you're like, how did Billy do that? And then you put all this pressure that I have to do it too, and I have to do it better than that person. Right. And I think that when we didn't have like all this stuff in front of us, we went on our own pace.
Yes.
Now we're trying to compete with others because we see too much right now.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
It,
Everything is in our face right now. So it creates a problem with the fact that I think there's just too much information outside where people are putting themselves in spaces to be competitive, comparing themselves to others, which we really shouldn't be doing, and it creates all this anxiety with people.
Absolutely.
yes. And I know, and Drue, I know you were marinating in thought over there. I'm very curious of what your thoughts on the perfectionist side of things regarding high performance, but then also what Lisa opined on how it affects the youth. What are your thoughts around it?
Yeah. So when it comes to youth, um, when working with youth in the children's services system, we do something called the Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths. And something that we assess for is like, does this child have a significant strength or interest that we can use for treatment? And so, if you have a kid, for instance, let's say who's involved in gang culture, well, and let's say they're a leader in gang culture, this kid could be a leader of a business. We're not optimizing this kid's talents to be used in a healthy way. And we just have to shift that and support them. A lot of times, kids can get
Wow.
involved in gang culture for to have a sense of belonging. So it's how can we find a healthy outlet for them? And as adults, we need healthy outlets. So
Yes.
when it comes to high performers, sometimes we just get caught up in being on the wheel, and it's really important for us to take a step back and to take a break and to really engage in the things that also bring us joy, and to also
Oh,
do things that fill our cup and not just be, what is the next task? What is the next thing that I have to do? And so
Yes.
leaning into your strengths, your talents, your interests is something that I definitely encourage. Um, and when it comes to perfectionism, I can also struggle with perfectionism. And my faith is really important to me, and I have to take a step back at times and I have to question, like, where is this coming from, and what is the actual fear? It's like, oh, I have to do this, but why? What is the fear of this? What is the worry? Well, if I don't do this, then that means I'm not going to get this opportunity. What fact? Who says that that's a fact? Is that true? So taking
Right.
it back and challenging my thoughts of, like, does this actually mean that I'm failing at this? Does this actually mean that this won't happen just because I made a mistake in this way? No, that's not going to happen. And so,
Critically thinking.
yes, definitely challenging, some of these thoughts of when we have this pressure on ourselves. Says who? Like, who says we have to do it this way? Um, and
Wow. Wow.
yeah, so
That
yeah.
wow.
I'm sorry.
I love the direction of this show, and it's just so crazy because even when I was growing up, in the culture. I grew up on Jay-Z, and the crazy thing about it was the song, it's This Can't Be Life. And he was comparing himself to Biggie, Pac, and Nas. Everybody doing them. I'm still scratching on the block like, damn, I'm gonna be a failure surrounded by drugs, thugs, and drug paraphernalia. Basically saying they're successful. I gotta reach those heights to be, and like that kind of comparative analysis is we should use it as a tool, not necessarily something we got to be hyper vigilant on and just over analyze and just overthink and just wear down our telomeres and stress about that, and then unravel our DNA after our telomeres are gone. So it really, people don't realize that's what's happening when we overdo and overthink these things. So we got to do a part 2 of this conversation too. Oh my goodness, we get on like a good soapbox, and then we got to shift gears. So how can we all follow you? Let's start with Drue. How can we follow you on social media, and just follow your phenomenal work that you're doing?
Yeah, so you can find me on social media at I am Drue Edwards. Be sure to spell my name Drue, not Drew. And you can also add me here on LinkedIn also as Drue Edwards.
Wonderful.
How about you, Anastacia? How can we follow you and just articulate your phenomenal work that you're doing?
Thank you. You can be on Facebook and Instagram at Healing Works Co. So Healing Works CO. And at Anastacia Sams. And then my website, I do have a newsletter too, and that's at www.healingworks.co. Not .com, co.
.co. Last but not least, Professor Curtis, how can we follow you? And by the way, I'm going to be sending each of you all LinkedIn requests, so it's not going to be a news flash or anything. Just putting it out there. I'm sure Lisa's going to do the same thing.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's just real simple. Instagram, I'm under, my stage name is Kurt, K-U-R-T, Lamarr with 2 R's. So Instagram, it would be Lamarr Kurt. Facebook, it would be Kurt Lamarr.
And we're dealing with, I don't know, Lisa keeps on popping in and out. Well, I'm going to big her up. You can follow Lisa on LinkedIn, Lisa Carrington. You can follow me on LinkedIn, Dr. Deonté Carter on LinkedIn. I am a poet, so the Odyssey, the poetic Odyssey of Dr. Ante Cartier / Dr. Handsome on Instagram and Facebook, but then also Dr. Ante Cartier on Instagram and Facebook as well. But with all that being said, you all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. And as the late, great, but never forgotten James Baldwin always has said, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. So do things with purpose. Always remember that, everyone. And you all have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Black Mental Health Matters.
Thank you.
Thank you all.